Hello, student. We're going to play with Maya again. And I want to show you a couple of things that I did not show you last class, and I thought it was important. It is important. There's a lot to show. If you remember last class, I started by Alt, middle mouse clicking in the side view so that this becomes the ground. And then I went and created a simple curve. And I asked you to create it from the bottom to the top, right? It's one click, 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 and click. Enter. And then I'll ask you to go and revolve it, right? Surfaces revolve. We want it to be poly. And we know that in the surfaces menu, a lot of the stuff is pertaining to nerves. So if I just do a regular revolve here, if I don't go in the option, it will make a nerve surface. In fact, I'll prove it to you. If I right mouse click, it's telling me isopar, CV or control vertex, and hole that are the typical elements of nerves. Same for surface patch and etc. etc. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control Z. And instead, I'm going to do surfaces revolve, and I'm going to go in my option box. I'm going to say that I want polys and that I want quads. I like quads better than triangle for some reason, at least for this. Anyway, so here we are. I did my leg generated by curve. I didn't show you, though, that I'm going to move this out of the way. If you, oops, look at this. Isn't that spectacular? Do you remember when I said that if you don't break the history, some odd things might happen? That's what I meant. That what can happen is that the history gets messed up. So let me leave the legs there because I want to still show you one thing about the history. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a curve again. But this time I'm going to create it from the top down. I'm going to make it bigger. So it's going to pretty much incorporate what I did earlier. It means my first leg is going to be hidden by this leg. How do I know that? Because everything in Maya always gets done based on the 0, 0 point. And we know that when I revolve, it's going to revolve based on this point right here. So it's going to go around my first leg and encapsulate it. So let's go back into my revolve and do the same thing, making sure that we are still in quads. Yep, there we are. I'm going to say revolve. But this time you can see that everything is black. Oh my goodness, why is that? The reason why is because this means that my surface is flipped. It's kind of like if you have a shirt and you have it inside out. That means anything that is the positive side has to be gray. So when I assign material, if I assign it to this leg as it is now, the material will be in the inside and I wouldn't be able to see it. So if I was assigning a shader that was wood, I would not see the wood. I would see this black color that is no good. By the way, I want to show you another trick that I didn't show you last time. Do you see how boxy this thing looks? So if I go and hit on my keyboard 2 or 3, it will change. Oops, sorry, I went too fast. It will change the in quote display mode of my leg. So right now I'm in display mode 3, and you can see it's nice and sexy. If I go into 1, it's boxy. It's very poly based. Now remember, the 3 is not how it's going to look when you render. This is how it's going to look when you render, is the 1. This is the 3 is how it's going to look if you smooth it and add a geometry to it. But I want to tell you that there are these display modes, 1, 2, and 3, that really help you also understand how your a mesh is going to render. So how do I fix this issue of the black, knowing that the black is bad because it means it's not the positive side, it's the side that I wouldn't see the material on? You always have to go and reverse it. Now, this is a poly, right? So because it's a poly, you want to go under mesh tools and reverse, or mesh display and reverse. There it is, mesh display reverse. And now you can see that everything is the way it should be. If this was a NURBS though, and I'm going to delete this because I don't need it anymore, but if the NURBS is actually displaying as black, you remember that surface is where NURBS commands are, so you want to go under surfaces and reverse direction. So remember, when you see black, when you don't see the traditional shader, that is a problem. So one more thing I want to tell you about this connection between the line or the curve and the geometry. How do I see that connection in the best possible way, and how do I see if I indeed broke the connection? So right now, if I go under, I select my two objects and I go under Window, General Editors, and these are your best friends, that both the hierarchy and the connections of this thing called hypergraph. So I'm going to open both so you can also see the difference between the two. So the hierarchy is actually a lot simpler because it just shows you what's there. This is a curve and this is the surface, right? Is the two boxes, and they're both in yellow because they're both selected. That means if I deselect and I select only the surface, you can see in yellow is the surface. If I go and click and drag and select both, they're both yellow. It means they're both selected. I can also go under the same general editor, but go under hypergraph connections. And this is quite more complicated, right? Because it shows me how everything started. It started from the curve right there. And then eventually it got to be right here, a mesh. So how do I know if my connections are broken? So what you want to do is you want to select the mesh. And no matter if you do it through this hypergraph here, or that is the connection hypergraph, or the hierarchy hypergraph through here, or you can do it through the outliner that is right here. These are all three super powerful tools for selecting parts of your work. But once you select the mesh, and if you go in Edit, Delete All by Type, History, pay attention to what happens to here where we see the connections, okay? Once I do that. Delete All by Type, History. Now you can see that there's one connection that is the shader. So that gray material that I was talking about earlier is still assigned to the mesh. But my curve now is completely solo. It doesn't matter if it's there or if it's not. To the point that at this point you can hit delete. It doesn't matter that the curve is there. So that's really, really nice. And remember how earlier when I was trying to move my leg with the curve, it was all being exploded. And that's because if you don't delete the history, things start acting up. And sometimes it's hard to make it act up. It just happens. So another thing I want to tell you that is kind of nice to know is also once you deleted the history, you can still go in, select your leg, go in, for example, vertex, select vertex. So go in the mode in which you see the subcomponent, and you can select a bunch of rows, hit R, that is the scale tool, and kind of change things. So you can still change it. It's not that, okay, now that my curve is gone, I'm doomed. You can still play with it. Just letting you know that the curve is, especially at the beginning, is powerful. Now remember, we're dealing with poly. So when you change stuff, it happens quite rigidly. Okay, so remember that as well. All right, let's talk right now, though, about copying as a copy and copying as an instance. So right now, I'm going to go in here. It's easier, Alt or Command and left mouse button. I love these way to navigate in Maya. It's really, really cool how easy it is and how it's been like that for 20 years. So once you have your curve, you can obviously duplicate it. How do we do that? I like to use Duplicate Special, and let's reset. And we can make it as a copy. So we can say Apply, and I'm going to hit W. So I'm making a copy of this original leg. So if I go in and change my leg, I hit R and scale it bigger, nothing happens, right? This thing stays independent. Same here. If I change it, nothing happens. That means these two, because I made a copy, are not attached. They're not related, in quote. But what happens if instead, I'm going to select this, and this time I do an instance. So if I do my Duplicate Special, and I'm going to say I want an instance. Now, pay attention that when you choose instance, the down here talks about parent. That is going to make more sense a little bit later. I'm going to say Duplicate Special, and I'm going to move it right here. And then I'm going to grab this object, and again, I'm going to scale it. And strangely enough, generally the instance follow, but somehow right now it hasn't. So that's quite interesting. So let me redo it and see what's the glitch. So my point is, and we can try again, and if I cannot figure it out instantly what the problem is, I will figure it out later. But sorry, I'm looking in here what I'm saying that I want an instance, and I want it to be the parent of my child instance. So that should really work. again, it's kind of interesting how sometimes, especially when you're in demo mode, things don't work out as you want to. So this is the child, though, and this is the parent. Now, the reason why I wanted to show it to you is because you have to be careful because there's something interesting here. That is, if you try to change the child, the mother doesn't change. But if you try to change the mother, that is the original mesh that you duplicated, the child generally does change. And strange enough, right now is not happening. So I will figure it out why and then do another demo. But what I wanted to show you today was the idea of the normals, they're called. That is, when the mesh is flipped, that means the normals are pointing to the inside, the wrong direction, and so the mesh is black. As well as how to inverse that, because that's kind of really important to do, especially when you get to the point of assigning material.